me! This is my house!
Mr. Bennett, under the founding heritage clause of 1847, this cabin now belongs to the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. You have 72 hours to vacate. Victoria Ashworth's voice was sharp enough to cut through the wind, each word pronounced like a verdict. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my work gloves, sawdust on my sleeves, watching her step forward with polished, predatory confidence. Behind her, 3 suited men lingered, arms clasped behind their backs, faces blank, eyes assessing. They were not there to negotiate. They were there to intimidate. "You are out of your jurisdiction," I said, quietly. "This cabin is on private property." Her lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Not anymore. The association voted this morning to exercise heritage claim. The paperwork is signed. You are trespassing, Mr. Bennett." "Heritage claim," I echoed. "You think a 19th century document gives your HOA the right to take my land?" "Not think," she said, stepping closer. "No." She handed me a legal packet thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. Her perfume smelled expensive, sterile, like victory. 72 hours. Make it easy on yourself. I did not look at the papers. "You ever worked with wood, Miss Ashworth?" I asked. Her expression flickered slightly. "Excuse me, because if you had, you would know something about grain. Every piece has a story. You can sand it, stain it, reshape it, but the truth is still there, running through the core. This cabin has its own story. You are standing on it, and you do not even know it." Her eyes narrowed. "I am not interested in stories, Mr. Bennett. Only facts. Then you are about to lose both." She turned sharply, her bodyguards following like shadows, gravel crunching under their expensive shoes. The BMW's door slammed, and as the engine faded down the dirt road, I stood alone holding a packet of threats that meant nothing against what I knew was hidden here. That was the last quiet moment I would have for a long time. My name is Marcus Bennett, 42, wood restoration specialist. For 15 years, I worked inside Boston's best museums, the kind that smell like varnish and old money. My job was to bring dead wood back to life, to strip away time and find the human behind the tool marks. But after my divorce and one too many nights falling asleep on a bench under fluorescent lights, I walked away. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. I wanted to hear the sound of trees instead of sirens. That is how I ended up at a town hall auction in Pine Ridge, New Hampshire, a small forgotten lake community trying to sell off abandoned land to stay solvent. I remember that morning perfectly. Cold air, stale coffee, the auctioneer droning through property after property no one wanted. Then came Lot 47, one wooden cabin, 2 acres, severe structural deterioration. Starting bid, $1. People chuckled. Someone muttered a bonfire waiting to happen. But when the grainy photo appeared on the projector, I saw it immediately. Something in the symmetry, the balance of lines. It was not just a shack. It was intentional, crafted. 25 cents, I called. The auctioneer paused. "Sir, minimum is $1. "Only if there is another bidder," I said. "State code allows open sale above 0 if uncontested after 60 seconds. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. No one countered. The clock ticked. When the gavel fell, the room erupted in laughter. I did not care. I had just bought a cabin for the price of a gumball, and a feeling in my gut told me it was the best deal I had ever made. The next morning, I drove out to see what I had bought. The road narrowed to gravel, then to dirt, then to silence. The cabin stood 50 yards from the waterline, wrapped in fog and neglect. Up close, I expected rot. Instead, I found resilience. The support beams American chestnut, extinct wood. The joinery mortise and tenon tight and true. Every cut carried intention. Someone had built this by hand, not for speed, but for meaning. Inside dust coated everything like frost. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the craftsmanship beneath the decay. The proportions were perfect, mathematical precision beneath the chaos. Whoever had designed this cabin was not a farmer or laborer. This was the work of a master. A creator who understood that wood-like faith needed both pressure and patience to endure. I spent days documenting it, measuring, photographing, sketching each joint. My process was methodical, forensic. It was not just curiosity, it was reverence. But soon I noticed I was not alone. It started with tire tracks on the dirt road. Then one afternoon, while measuring beams near the old fireplace, movement flickered in the reflection of a broken window. A black BMW idling 50 yards away, someone watching. The next day it returned, and the next. Through binoculars, I saw her an older woman, silver hair, expensive coat, the kind of elegance that does not belong on a back road. She was not sightseeing, she was scouting. I decided to wait. By the fourth visit, I had installed small motion cameras around the property, disguised in hollow knots and birdhouses. Museum work teaches you that people live footage does not. When I checked the recordings, my suspicions turned to certainty. She was not just visiting, she was documenting, taking photos, measuring distances, sometimes accompanied by men in suits. Whoever she was, she had a plan, and I had become part of it. That night, as rain hammered the roof, I went to the basement to clear rubble. That is when I found it. Behind a crumbling stone wall, a beam jutted out at an odd angle. Its surface shimmered faintly under my flashlight. At first, I thought it was a carpenter's mark, but as I brushed off, the grime patterns emerged, tiny geometric symbols carved so precisely they looked machined. Circles, arcs, lines forming constellations I half recognized. It was not random. It was a language. Over the next 3 days, I became obsessed. Every inch of the cabin yielded more, hidden beneath joints inside seams carved into places no one would ever see. 47 markings in total. Masonic symbols. Astronomical alignments, each etched by hand with steady, deliberate care. I had seen museum pieces worth millions with less sophistication. It was not just art, it was authorship. Someone had signed this building. But who? I knew better than to alert the local authorities. If I was right, the last thing I needed was government bureaucracy or opportunistic collectors. Instead, I decided to control the narrative. I created an Instagram account, Wood Detective NH. The first post, a close-up of a carved joint catching sunlight like a hidden rune, went mildly viral among woodworking circles. Within a week, I had 12,000 followers and enough attention to build credibility before anyone else could rewrite the story. Then I reached out to an old friend, Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, conservator at the Smithsonian. Brilliant, blunt, and trustworthy. I sent her 12 high-resolution images of the carvings. She called me before midnight. "Marcus, are you sitting down?" she said. "Why?" "Because you have just found the holy grail of American craftsmanship." Her tone alone stopped my breathing. "These carvings match the known signature of Elias Whitmore." I froze. "You are kidding." "I wish I were. We only have fragments of his work, small furniture pieces, decorative panels, but a complete structure." Her voice trembled. "If this is authentic, you are standing inside the only surviving Whitmore building on Earth." I looked around at the cracked beams, the quiet space filled with centuries of silence. My heart pounded with equal parts awe and dread. "Eleanor, what are we talking about here? Value-wise?" She hesitated. "A Whitmore chair sold for $400,000 3 years ago. Marcus, a whole building could be worth millions, maybe 8 figures depending on provenance." The words did not feel real. Millions. For something I bought for a quarter. For a building everyone else had written off as trash. I hung up and stared at the walls, running my hand along the grain. The marks were not just decorative, they were deliberate, almost spiritual. I could feel the heartbeat of the craftsman across time. But beneath the excitement was unease. Because if I had found this, someone else already knew it was here. And judging by the black BMW parked again at the edge of the woods the next morning, they were done watching. They were waiting. It was official. Victoria was escalating. So I escalated too. I called my lawyer friend from Boston, Jake Morrison, a man who had built his career protecting people from corporate predators. "Marcus," he said, after I explained the situation, "I have dealt with HOAs before, but this one sounds like a cult with paperwork." "She is not bluffing," I replied. "She is methodical. She has been watching me for weeks." Jake paused, then sighed. "Okay, let us get ahead of this. Whatever she is planning, she is counting on isolation, so we flip the script, make it public." That idea stuck in my head like a spark looking for fuel. I knew Pine Ridge was a gossip town. Rumors moved faster than official statements. So I decided to plant the kind of rumor that grows roots before the truth catches up. The next morning, I drove into town and took a seat at Maggie's Cafe, the kind of place where everyone's conversation pauses when a stranger walks in. I ordered black coffee, pulled out my phone, and called Jake loud enough for people to overhear. Yeah, Jake Smithsonian confirmed it looks like 19th century folk architecture. Possibly Whitmore's lost work, I said, keeping my tone casual. If it is real, we are looking at museum-level valuation. Millions, maybe. By the time I hung up, half the cafe had gone quiet. I did not look up. I did not need to. Small towns are predictable ecosystems, shock, curiosity, whisper network. Within hours, the whole of Pine Ridge would know about the stranger who found a national treasure in the woods. By noon, it worked. People who had ignored me for weeks suddenly waved when I passed. Someone even left a note on my truck windshield. Heard you are restoring something special, keep it safe. But not everyone was thrilled. That evening, a town hall meeting was announced on the HOA's bulletin board Community Preservation Discussion, Thursday, 7 p.m. The signature at the bottom, Victoria Ashworth, HOA President. Thursday came fast. When I walked into the Pine Ridge Community Center, every seat was filled. Locals, reporters, even the sheriff. Victoria stood at the front wearing a navy suit and the smile of a politician who had already decided the outcome. Friends and neighbors, she began, her voice amplified through the old speaker system. We have a serious issue concerning the stewardship of our community's historical property. Her eyes flicked toward me. A non-resident has purchased a cabin that appears to hold cultural significance, but rather than donating it to public preservation, he has begun exploiting it for personal gain. There it was. The narrative outsider villain versus community hero, classic playbook. Before she could finish, I stood. Mind if I speak? I asked. The room fell silent. Even Victoria hesitated. By all means, Mr. Bennett, she said. I walked to the front, slowly feeling every eye on me. I am not here to exploit anything. I began steady and calm. What I found is not just wood and history, it is art. And art does not belong behind HOA walls. It belongs to everyone who can appreciate it. I told them about the symbols, the carvings, the historical value, not as a boast, but as a revelation. The cabin may be the work of Elias Whitmore, I said, watching recognition ripple across the room. His craftsmanship shaped early American design. This could put Pine Ridge on the map for heritage, education, and tourism. Murmurs spread. People glanced at one another. Curiosity overpowered skepticism. Victoria's jaw tightened, her carefully built story crumbling under the weight of facts. Then an older woman near the back raised her hand. Mr. Bennett, she said in a clear, measured voice, I would like to speak with you privately. She stepped forward, silver hair, glasses, eyes that carried decades of quiet intelligence. I am Eleanor Hartwell, retired town librarian. There are things about that cabin and about the Ashworth family you need to know. Something in her tone carried gravity, the kind of weight that silences speculation. I nodded. Tomorrow morning, she said. Library basement, 9 sharp. As I left the meeting, I caught Victoria watching me from across the parking lot. Her smile was gone, replaced by something colder. She knew she had lost control of the crowd, and that meant she would try to regain it another way. That night, I reviewed my security footage. The cameras caught something chilling. Victoria had arrived an hour before the meeting and met privately with several residents in the parking lot. She was not leading a discussion, she was staging a performance. Every outrage, every line of concern had been rehearsed. The HOA was not reacting to events, it was executing a strategy. The next morning, the library smelled of dust and paper. Eleanor led me past the front desk, down a narrow stairway into the archives, rows of metal cabinets and leather-bound volumes chronicling 2 centuries of Pine Ridge history. Her movements were precise practice. I have spent 55 years organizing these records, she said softly, and what I found about your cabin connects to something much larger. She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages lined with meticulous ink. This belonged to Thomas Ashworth Victorious, great-great-grandfather. She laid it open under the yellow light. He was obsessed with acquiring the Whitmore property. When Whitmore refused to sell, Thomas wrote about him like a man insulted by God himself. She began reading the 15th of November, 1849, offered 10 times value. The arrogant craftsman refused, claiming true ownership finds its own way. I will have his land if it takes generations. Eleanor's eyes darkened. This is not new, Marcus. The Ashworths have been trying to claim that property for 175 years. Victoria is just finishing what her ancestor started. I turned the pages slowly. The ink grew angrier, with each entry resentment evolving into obsession. Whitmore was not just a target, he was a symbol of everything Thomas could not control. Why would anyone hold a grudge that long, I asked. Because greed does not die, she replied. It is inherited. Then she pulled out something else, a thin folded letter sealed under glass, written by Elias Whitmore himself, 1,850. She handed it to me carefully. The handwriting was elegant, the tone almost poetic. If these words are read, the house has found its rightful keeper. True ownership is not written in deeds, but among the stars. Art cannot be possessed, only protected. I read it twice, the meaning slipping between literal and cryptic. Among the stars, I asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. Elias was known for his fascination with astronomy. I believe he embedded something in the structure itself, a message, a test, maybe even proof of rightful ownership. She opened another file folder, this one filled with old property maps and correspondence. The Ashworths created shell companies to buy surrounding land. They used false names, manipulated boundaries. When Victoria founded the HOA in 1985, she effectively weaponized bureaucracy. Every fine, every heritage, clause, tools of control. The scope of it sank in like cold water. So this is not about me, I said slowly. It is about legacy. Eleanor nodded. And you, Marcus, just stepped into the middle of a 175-year-old family war. As we packed up the materials, she paused, lowering her voice. There is more hidden in that cabin, I am certain of it. Whitmore was not just building a home, he was creating a statement meant to outlast corruption. The key is in that line, written among the stars. I looked at her, realizing what she was suggesting. You think it is celestial, she smiled. If I am right, we will see it when the night is clear. Outside, the sky was turning gray. Across the street, the black BMW was parked again, engine idling. I did not need binoculars to see Victoria inside her eyes, fixed on us through tinted glass. This was not surveillance anymore. It was declaration. That night, the cabin felt smaller, the walls heavier. I could hear the creak of timber settling in the cold, and wondered whether Whitmore had anticipated this, that his masterpiece would one day ignite a war between greed and preservation. As I set the old letter beside my tools, I whispered to the man who had built this place centuries ago, I will find what you hid, and I will make sure it stays out of their hands. Outside, a pair of headlights lingered on the dirt road longer than they should have, then disappeared into the dark. The air outside the library carried the kind of cold that burns your lungs. I watched the black BMW idle across the street, exhaust curling through the mist like smoke signals from an unseen fire. Victoria was inside, pretending not to stare. I pretended not to care, but the truth was, my pulse was hammering. Every move she made now felt choreographed, too precise, too confident. That night I sat in the cabin with the lights off, staring at Whitmore's letter spread across my workbench. True ownership is written among the stars. I whispered the words aloud as if saying them might change their meaning. Stars, architecture, patterns. It was not poetry. It was instruction. I pulled out the photos I had taken of the carvings, the symbols etched into the beams, circles intersecting lines, constellations. I overlaid them with an old astronomy app on my phone. At first, nothing matched, but when I rotated the alignment and shifted the date back to October 1850, the pieces clicked like gears finding their rhythm. The carvings were not random. They mirrored Ursa Major, the Great Bear, the constellation containing Polaris. Whitmore had not just carved art, he had encoded coordinates. By morning, I was convinced the cabin itself was a map. I called Eleanor. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, I was hoping you would say that, she said. Meet me at the cabin tonight. Bring your drone. When night fell, the lake was glass, reflecting the full moon. Eleanor arrived with a rolled bundle of antique star charts, the edges yellowed and fragile. We set up the drone behind the cabin. If Whitmore wrote his message among the stars, she said, "We will find it from above." I launched the drone. Its hum cut through the stillness. At 50 meters, the live feed flickered, and then there it was. My breath caught. From the ground, the roof looked like uneven shingles, but from above, under moonlight, it became geometry-perfect deliberate. Each shingle was angled to reflect light in a way that formed a pattern, 7 bright points, connected by faint seams of shadow. Eleanor leaned over the monitor, eyes wide. "Ursa Major," she whispered. "The Big Dipper. The same constellation in the carvings," I said. He turned the roof into a celestial mirror. We traced the direction of the pointer stars Dubhe and Merak, leading toward Polaris. The map was not metaphorical anymore, it was literal. If he used the stars as alignment, then he was pointing to something, I murmured. Eleanor unrolled a map of the original Pine Ridge land survey from 1850. "Look here," she said, placing her finger on the eastern shore. "This tree line if we follow the constellations angle." We hiked through the woods, guided by the beam of my flashlight and the star map's alignment. After about 200 meters, the forest opened around a massive oak, its trunk thick as a car, its roots gripping the soil like a guardian. "It would have been here in Whitmore's time," Eleanor said softly. "He might have buried something beneath it. The ground was dense with roots and time." I took the metal detector from my pack and swept it slowly across the base. It stayed silent until I circled the north side, then beep. A sharp, steady tone. I looked at Eleanor. "Got something." We dug carefully, layer by layer, until the shovel hit metal with a dull thud. It was a rectangular box iron wrapped in oilskin. We carried it back to the cabin, dirt still clinging to its surface. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside was a stack of parchment sealed with wax. Eleanor held her breath. "Marcus, this is his handwriting." The first page was dated October 20th, 1850. The title, Last Will and Testament of Elias Whitmore. I read aloud, "I, Elias Whitmore, being of sound mind and purpose, bequeath my lake property to whosoever possesses the soul and patience to perceive beauty hidden within decay. The structure embodies my life's work. Half of its assessed value shall forever fund the education of young artisans in this community that they may learn to build as their forebears built with reverence, not haste." Eleanor wiped her eyes. He was not just an artist, Marcus. He was a philosopher. The will was clear, detailed, airtight. Whitmore had predicted greed and written a safeguard into his art. Anyone claiming the cabin for profit would disqualify themselves. The rightful owner was not determined by blood or law, but by understanding. "This changes everything," Eleanor whispered. "Victoria's claim does not stand a chance." But before we could celebrate, headlights cut through the window. A car had pulled into my driveway. Black, sleek, silent. "Stay here," I told her. I stepped outside into the cold. Victoria stood by the BMW, her breath fogging in the light. She was alone this time. "Evening, Mr. Bennett," she said softly. "You are trespassing." "So are you technically?" she replied. "Depending on how you interpret heritage law." I folded my arms. Cut to the chase. She tilted her head. "I admire your persistence, truly. But you have wandered into something much larger than you understand." I smiled faintly. "You mean your family business?" Her eyes flashed. "My family built this town. Every board, every deed, every inch of progress here exists because of us. Do you think some relic of a hermit craftsman will change that?" "Maybe it already has," I said. "I found his will." That made her blink. Just for a second, her mask slipped. "You are lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I took a step closer. "It is real, signed, dated, and it names the rightful heir, someone who values art over ownership. That is me, not you." Her lips tightened. "You cannot imagine how expensive your defiance will be." "Funny," I said. "I was thinking the same thing about your fraud." She turned, opening her car door, but paused before getting in. "You have made a mistake, Mr. Bennett. One you will not get to correct." The door shut, the tail lights vanished into the night, and I stood in silence, feeling the invisible countdown that had just begun. Inside, Eleanor was shaking slightly. "Marcus, she is dangerous." "I know," I said, "which is why we are going to finish this fast." We spent the next 48 hours scanning every beam, every marking, photographing the will, encrypting copies, and sending them to Jake. He called immediately. "Marcus, this document is gold," he said. "It is a binding testament predating modern inheritance law. If authenticated, you own that cabin outright, and Victoria's claim collapses." "Then we go public," I said. "Not yet," he warned. "We need context, proof of intent. Find more physical evidence of Whitmore's authorship. Anything that ties him to that land." The next day, Eleanor returned with a revelation. "I reviewed Thomas Ashworth's later entries," she said, placing photocopies on the table. "He mentioned the stars and the oak, exact words. He knew about Whitmore's celestial design, but he could not decode it. That is why his descendants kept trying. They believe if they control this land, they control its secret." She looked at me intensely. "But it is not about control, Marcus. It is about comprehension." That night, the forest felt alive. Branches swayed without wind. A branch snapped outside the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, but saw nothing. Just the lake, silent and silver under moonlight. Still, my gut screamed that I was being watched. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat beside the open box, Whitmore's will glinting under the lantern. I traced the ink with my finger. The words had survived centuries of greed and decay, just waiting for someone to understand them. But Victoria was not done. The following morning, 2 uniformed inspectors showed up at my gate, claiming they were there for a code compliance review. They flashed IDs that looked legitimate at first glance, but the county office had no record of them. They snapped photos, muttered into earpieces, and left without a word. That afternoon, I received a cease and desist letter accusing me of tampering with historical property under active review. She was tightening the net. Jake called that night. "Marcus, you need to document everything. Every visit, every letter, every violation notice. She is trying to bury you in paperwork and fear." "I am not backing down," I said. "I know," he replied. "But she is not either, so we hit her where it hurts her credibility." By the end of that week, Eleanor and I had assembled enough evidence to prove 2 things: the cabin's authenticity and Victoria's century spanning fraud. But proof was not protection. As I stared out across the lake that night, I thought about Whitmore, about the man who had built beauty and hidden meaning inside wood because he knew the world would try to corrupt it. I wondered if he had ever felt what I felt now, both awe and fear holding something sacred while surrounded by greed. And for the first time since buying this cabin, I realized the truth. This was not just about art or law. It was about legacy and who deserved to carry it forward. The morning of the hearing broke with a kind of stillness that only comes before a storm. The lake was motionless, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Inside the cabin, the air hummed with tension. Eleanor was double-checking files, carefully aligning each document inside her rolling case. Jake sat at my table sipping lukewarm coffee, flipping through a binder of legal precedents. Remember, he said this is not just about property, it is about dismantling the illusion of power. She will come armed with law, we come armed with truth. I nodded, but my stomach churned. "You really think the town will side with me?" Jake smirked. "They will side with whoever tells the better story. Fortunately, you have got the original author on your side, Elias Whitmore." By 9 a.m., the Pine Ridge Town Hall was overflowing. Cars lined both sides of Main Street. Local news vans parked by the courthouse steps. Inside, the crowd buzzed with the electric hum of curiosity. It was not just a hearing anymore. It was a showdown. Victoria sat at the front with her 5-person legal team. They looked like a row of ravens in matching charcoal suits. Her expression was calm, composed, but I caught the faint twitch of her fingers as she shuffled papers. It was the kind of micro-movement you only see in people trying to mask anxiety with confidence. The hearing began with a low gavel strike. The chairman, a silver-haired councilman named Peterson, cleared his throat. "We are here today to address the property dispute between the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association and Mr. Marcus Bennett regarding the cabin at Lot 47. Mrs. Ashworth, you may begin." Victoria rose slowly, her voice perfectly measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about greed or power. It is about preservation. The property in question holds historical and cultural value that must be protected by the community, not claimed by a single opportunist. She glanced at me, the word opportunist dropping like a knife. Her team began clicking through a polished PowerPoint presentation, charts, maps, old documents projected onto the wall. It was clean, persuasive, a performance honed through repetition. Even I had to admit it was effective theater. Then came the turn. Peterson nodded toward our table. "Mr. Morrison, Mr. Bennett, you may respond." Jake stood, his tone casual, almost disarmingly calm. "Thank you, Chairman. Before we get lost in the smoke of fancy citations, let us talk about the fire underneath." He turned to the crowd. The Pine Ridge Homeowners Association is not and has never been the legal descendant of the 1847 community government that enacted the Heritage Clause. It is a private corporation founded in 1985, which means their entire claim is based on a lie. He produced copies of incorporation documents, handing them to the board. The room murmured. Jake did not pause. Their so-called authority is a performance, a shadow play designed to intimidate property owners into compliance. Mrs. Ashworth is not preserving history. She is rewriting it. Victoria's jaw clenched, but she stayed seated. Then Jake looked at me. "Marcus, show them." I walked to the center of the room with a small wooden box we had found, buried beneath the oak. When I opened it, the air seemed to thicken. Inside lay Whitmore's original, Will Its ink still sharp after 175 years. This document, I said voice steady, was written by the man who built that cabin. Elias Whitmore did not just create a home. He created a message to future generations, a message about integrity, creativity, and stewardship. I held up the first page and began reading. "This structure represents the culmination of my life's work. It shall belong to whosoever has the soul to perceive beauty hidden within decay. Half its value shall be used to educate future artisans in the art of creation." The room went silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. "This is not a property," I continued. "It is a promise. And that promise does not belong to the Ashworth family or their association. It belongs to every child who will learn to build with their hands, because this man believed art could outlast greed." Eleanor stepped forward next, carrying her stack of journals. "If I may," she said softly, adjusting her glasses. "These pages belong to Thomas Ashworth, Victoria's ancestor. They prove that this so-called preservation effort began as an act of revenge against Whitmore, who refused to sell his land in 1849. For nearly 2 centuries, the Ashworth family has pursued control, not protection of this property." She opened the journal and began to read the 30th of November, 1849. "The craftsman mocks me with talk of legacy. I will see his legacy buried beneath my own." Gasps rippled through the room. Jake moved beside her, holding up property records showing decades of fraudulent acquisitions through shell companies. "They have been playing the same game for generations," he said. "Different names, same intent, control." Victoria rose abruptly. "These are unfounded accusations," she snapped. "Personal attacks without relevance." On the contrary, Jake countered, his voice rising just enough to fill the hall. "They are the very foundation of your supposed authority. You have built an empire of lies, Mrs. Ashworth, brick by brick, fine by fine, foreclosure by foreclosure." The chairman banged the gavel for order, but the damage was done. The crowd had shifted. The facade had cracked. Then came the knockout blow. Eleanor wheeled over a projector and displayed a digital overlay Whitmore's roof pattern aligned with Ursa Major, matched against 1,850 sky charts. "This is no coincidence," she explained. "Whitmore embedded a celestial map into his design, his signature, his proof of authorship. This cabin is not just art. It is astronomy carved into architecture." For a moment, no one breathed. The imagery was undeniable. Even the most skeptical board members leaned forward, mesmerized by the elegance of it. Jake stepped in for the final strike. "So let us review," he said, pacing. "An HOA with no legal authority invokes a dead law to seize private property built by a man whose will clearly states its rightful ownership. Meanwhile, Mrs. Ashworth's own ancestor documented his intent to steal it. Tell me which of these facts sounds like preservation to you." Victoria's lead attorney stood to object, but she stopped him with a small shake of her head. Her face was pale, eyes cold, calculating. She knew they were beaten, but she was not done. When the board finally deliberated, the silence was thick enough to touch. Then Peterson spoke, his tone firm. "This hearing finds that the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association lacks legal jurisdiction to enforce the Heritage Clause of 1847. Mr. Bennett's ownership is valid. Furthermore, this board recommends that state authorities investigate potential misconduct by the association." Applause erupted. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing. I turned toward Eleanor and Jake, both grinning, like exhausted warriors. For a moment, it felt like the air itself had lightened, like justice had finally drawn its first breath. But then Victoria stood. Her face was unreadable. She walked straight toward me through the crowd, stopping just close enough that only I could hear her whisper, "This is not over, Mr. Bennett. You have embarrassed me. You have humiliated my family. But I have resources you cannot imagine. You think you have won, but you have only drawn blood. And when people like me bleed, we do not heal, we hunt." She smiled that same cold precision as the first day on my porch and turned away as police escorted her from the hall for questioning. Outside, the autumn air was sharp and full of noise, reporters shouting questions, townspeople cheering, cameras flashing. Jake put a hand on my shoulder. "You realize she is not bluffing," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but neither am I." That night back at the cabin, the victory felt hollow. The lake was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. The air carried the metallic scent of rain. Eleanor sat beside me, sipping tea, her voice low. "Whitmore would be proud of you, Marcus. You did exactly what he hoped, protected beauty from corruption." I smiled, faintly staring at the carvings above us. "Funny thing about beauty," I said. "It attracts attention, and not always the good kind." The cabin creaked as the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. A faint hum echoed through the trees, the sound of an engine idling. I stepped outside and saw headlights flash once before vanishing into the dark. She was out there, waiting. And though the town thought the war was over, I knew better. For people like Victoria Ashworth, defeat was not an end. It was a delay. For 48 hours after the hearing, Pine Ridge was electric. Reporters swarmed the town like migrating birds, chasing a story that had gone from small-town dispute to national symbol of corruption exposed. The front page of the Boston Chronicle read, "Local Restorer Defeats HOA Empire in Historic Ruling." Beneath it, a photo of me standing outside Town Hall, the old Whitmore will in my hand, sunlight cutting through the courthouse glass. But victory has an aftertaste, and mine tasted like adrenaline and unease. Eleanor stayed at the cabin that night, sorting files while I sat by the fire, still wearing the same clothes from the hearing. "We did it," she said softly. "You protected his legacy." "Maybe," I said, staring into the flames. But Whitmore's story is not over, and neither is hers. Outside the forest, whispered under wind. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. My mind flashed back to those headlights after the hearing, the brief flare of light disappearing into the dark. 2 mornings later, the retaliation began. First, my phone started ringing non-stop. Unknown numbers, hang-ups, automated messages about unpaid taxes, false bank alerts. My mailbox filled with anonymous letters, some mocking, others threatening. Online fake posts appeared, claiming I had forged the will. An anonymous blog accused Eleanor of falsifying town records. Someone wanted to rewrite the story before it had time to settle into truth. Jake called from Boston, voice tense. She is using her media connections. Classic strategy, discredit, confuse, delay, investigation. But the state is already moving. You are safe legally. Legally, I repeated. Does not feel like it. That night, I found my workshop door open. Inside, the air reeked of gasoline. A single matchbox sat on the workbench, its brand embossed with gold lettering Ashworth Enterprises. She was not finished. She was reminding me what came next if I kept standing tall. I spent that night on the porch with my shotgun, across my knees, eyes fixed on the tree line. But dawn came quietly, only the sound of loons on the lake. She had not come for fire, just fear, By the end of the week, the real fire hit her instead. Jake called again, tone different, this time sharper, satisfied. Federal investigators moved in this morning. Bank accounts, frozen records seized. Turns out your case opened a can of worms they have been circling for years. Wire fraud, racketeering property, extortion, the works. I laughed for the first time in days. Justice with a warrant. Justice with handcuffs, he said. She is cornered. It took 3 more days for the FBI to make the arrest. They found her at a private airstrip outside Concord, trying to board a flight to Montreal under a fake name. When the footage hit the evening news, Pine Ridge erupted in applause. The same people who once whispered about my crazy cabin now left flowers at my gate. A child drew a note on cardboard. "Thank you for saving our town, Mr. Bennett." I pinned it above my workbench. But as satisfying as her downfall was, what followed was quieter and heavier. The real victory was not about defeating Victoria Ashworth. It was about reclaiming what greed had stolen the town's sense of ownership over its own history. When federal agents combed through the HOA's financials, they uncovered something staggering. Over 23 families had lost their homes to fraudulent heritage claims across 3 counties. Most had never fought back, too intimidated or broke to challenge the fines. Eleanor and I met many of them as they came forward. Retired teachers, veterans, single parents, they all carried the same haunted look. Jake took their cases pro bono. "This is bigger than you and me," he said. "We are going to turn this into something permanent." He was not kidding. Within a month, the Pine Ridge Legal Defense Network was born, a nonprofit dedicated to helping homeowners fight HOA abuse. What started as a single victory turned into a movement. Local news called it the Whitmore Effect. The state attorney general launched a formal inquiry into HOA corruption. Legislators drafted new bills limiting HOA enforcement powers. And, for the first time, ordinary homeowners were speaking publicly about their fears. But my life did not go back to normal, because normal had burned away with the first matchbox. The Smithsonian authenticated Whitmore's will and the cabin's celestial design. They valued the structure at $12 million, a number that did not feel real. Journalists flooded my inbox with interview requests. Museum curators called daily. Offers rolled in from collectors, historians, even a Netflix documentary crew. I turned them all down. Instead, I called Eleanor and Jake to the cabin one crisp November morning. We stood together by the fireplace, where Whitmore's carvings glowed under fresh polish. "Half of it," I said quietly. That is what he wrote. "Half of its value goes to educating young artisans." Jake nodded slowly. "You are really doing it, huh?" "I am not just doing it," I said. "I am finishing it." That winter, I founded the Elias Whitmore Foundation for Artisanship and Heritage. $6 million went into the trust. The rest I used to preserve the property as a living museum, part workshop, part retreat. Children from local schools came for field trips. Retired carpenters volunteered as mentors. The cabin that once symbolized secrecy now echoed with laughter and the rhythm of mallets striking chisels. One afternoon, a 12-year-old girl named Emma Patterson, granddaughter of one of Victoria's victims, stood beside me at the workbench. Her small hands guided a chisel through maple, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mr. Bennett," she said without looking up, "why would someone build something beautiful and then hide it?" I smiled. "Because some things are not meant to be sold, Emma. They are meant to be found." She nodded, the kind of understanding that does not come from words but from feeling. I saw it in her eyes, the same spark Whitmore must have seen when he carved those hidden stars. By spring, the story had gone national. The New York Times ran an editorial titled, "The Carpenter Who Outsmarted the Corporation." But fame was not the point. The real reward was walking through town and seeing people rebuild what corruption had hollowed out. The old diner reopened. The town library got a grant to digitize historical archives led by Eleanor herself. She named the project Legacy in the Grain. Jake expanded his firm, hiring lawyers dedicated to fighting HOA abuse across New England. He called it the Homefront Initiative. "My dad would have wanted this," he told me, once eyes distant. "He died thinking people like Victoria always win. Now every case we take proves him wrong." As for Victoria, she never saw the inside of another courtroom as a free woman. The FBI's case stuck wire fraud, extortion, document tampering, 8 years federal, all assets seized, the Ashworth estate liquidated, the empire that took generations to build dissolved in a single fiscal quarter. But the strangest thing, I did not feel triumph. I felt release. The night the verdict went public, I walked to the lake. The moon floated on the water like a coin tossed by the universe itself. I thought about Whitmore, about his obsession with stars and craftsmanship, about how his message had crossed centuries to land in my hands. True ownership is written among the stars. He had not meant astronomy. He had meant continuity, the passing of care from one soul to another. Ownership was not about possession. It was about protection. I looked back at the cabin, light glowing through its windows, children's voices drifting from the workshop inside. And for the first time, I understood what legacy really was. Eleanor joined me on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You think he knew it would come to this?" she asked. "Maybe not this," I said. "But he knew someone would need to choose between greed and grace. I just happened to be standing in the right doorway when history knocked." She smiled softly. "Then I suppose that makes you his successor." "Not successor," I said. "Just caretaker." The stars reflected in the lake shifted as the wind stirred the surface. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the past and present felt aligned like Whitmore's roof under moonlight. The battle that began with a 25-cent bid had ended not with revenge, but restoration. And that, I realized, was the real masterpiece. 2 years passed before I realized the sound of hammers had replaced the sound of fear in Pine Ridge. Where there was once tension, there was now rhythm. The kind of rhythm you hear in creation, steady, deliberate, hopeful. The Whitmore cabin had become the heart of that rhythm, a place where the past and present spoke in the same quiet language of wood and patience. Most mornings I still woke before dawn, the lake wrapped in fog like a secret. The air smelled of pine resin and wet earth. Inside the cabin glowed with soft lamplight chisels lined neatly on the workbench. The same beams that once carried hidden signatures now carried laughter, questions, and the scraping of planes shaping new wood. It was not just a museum anymore. It was alive. Kids from all over New Hampshire came here, now some wide-eyed, some shy, all curious. They touched the grain of Whitmore's beams as though feeling the pulse of something sacred. I would show them how to hold a chisel, how to listen to the resistance of the wood. "It will tell you when to stop," I would say, and they would laugh like I was joking. But a few of them, the quiet ones, always got it. They would pause, close their eyes, and feel that whisper in the timber. That is how I knew Whitmore's spirit had not faded. It had multiplied. The Elias Whitmore Foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. With Eleanor's guidance and Jake's relentless advocacy, we built scholarships, workshops, and a small artisan school by the lake. The classrooms smelled like cedar and beeswax instead of disinfectant. Instead of plastic chairs, there were workbenches. Instead of fluorescent lights, windows wide enough to let the sun draw patterns across the floor. Emma Patterson was our first graduate. She had grown from that 12-year-old girl with hesitant hands into a young woman whose carvings made people stop mid-sentence. The first time she sold a miniature replica of the cabin roof, every shingle hand cut, she refused to take payment. Instead, she donated it to the foundation's auction to fund other kids' tuition. "He gave it forward," she said, touching the beam where Whitmore's hidden stars still slept. So should we. Some nights I would find her in the workshop, long after everyone else had gone home, tracing the carvings with her fingertips, the same way I once did. "Do you ever feel like he is watching?" she asked once. "Not watching," I said. "Waiting. For the next hands that understand." The cabin had become more than a symbol. It was a mirror reflecting what people could be when they stopped chasing ownership and started embracing care. The town changed too. Pine Ridge was not the forgotten place on a map anymore. Tourists came, sure, but they did not come for hotels or boutiques. They came for meaning. They came to see how a craftsman's vision could outlast greed by 2 centuries. Local businesses reopened. The diner where Eleanor used to get her coffee now served woodworkers from Vermont and students from Massachusetts. The community center that once hosted HOA meetings now hosted woodworking exhibits, art shows, and public talks on ethics in restoration. The same hall where Victoria had tried to humiliate me now displayed a permanent exhibit titled Truth in the Grain. At its center stood Whitmore's original chisel encased in glass. Beneath it, engraved in brass, were his words, "True ownership is written among the stars." Eleanor's project, the Hartwell Digital Archive, went live that spring. She spent months scanning and cataloging every document, journal, and record connected to the town's tangled past. Her voice trembled with pride at the launch ceremony. Now, she said, no secret can ever hide in Pine Ridge again. Jake, meanwhile, had turned victory into vocation. His office in Boston was stacked with boxes labeled HOA cases active. The waiting room was full every day. Retirees, single moms, veterans, people whose lives were being squeezed by petty tyrants and legal predators. He would greet each one personally, shake their hands, and tell them the same thing. "I know exactly what you are up against. Let us make them regret it." He called it his father's legacy. I called it redemption. Victoria Ashworth's empire was gone, stripped down to ash and memory. Her mansion sold to pay restitution. Her company dissolved. And in a quiet courtroom, one gray December morning, the same judge who had ruled in my favor handed down her sentence, 8 years federal, plus full financial repayment to victims. She did not cry, she did not speak. But for the first time, she looked small, a woman buried under the weight of a name she had mistaken for destiny. When news broke, I did not celebrate. I drove to the cabin instead. The air was cold enough to frost my breath. Inside, I sat by the fire and reread Whitmore's will. His words had carried across 175 years to find me. Maybe they were always meant for someone who needed to remember what ownership really meant. The next morning, I carved my own initials beside his "not," large not to claim, but to acknowledge. 2 sets of letters separated by centuries, sharing the same beam. A craftsman's quiet handshake across time. By summer, the foundation hosted its first Whitmore Symposium. Artists, historians, and builders from across the country gathered to talk about how craft could heal communities. I watched them from the porch, the lake glittering behind them, and realized something strange. No one talked about greed, or law, or ownership. They talked about care, patience, and beauty. That is when I understood the story had outgrown me. It was not my fight anymore. It was everyone's. Later that night, after the last guest left, I stayed behind with Eleanor and Jake. We sat around the fire pit, the stars sharp above us. The Big Dipper hung exactly where it had that first night we flew the drone. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "You ever think about how all this started?" Jake chuckled. "Yeah, 25 cents and a stubborn man with a hammer." I smiled. "And a ghost who refused to be forgotten." Silence settled between us, comfortable and full, the kind that means peace, not absence. Eventually they went inside. I stayed staring at the constellations. The same sky Whitmore must have seen in 1850. The same stars he carved into his roof, eternal witnesses to human folly and faith. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard a voice in it, faint, amused, approving. "Guard it well," it seemed to say. I whispered back always. When dawn broke, the first rays hit the cabin's roof just right, revealing the faint pattern of Ursa Major once more. I smiled, realizing that even after 2 centuries, Whitmore's stars still pointed true. Not just to the north, but to purpose, because that is what he left behind, not wealth, not property, but direction. A map for anyone brave enough to read it. And in that light, surrounded by everything I had fought to protect, I finally understood why he had hidden it all beneath dust and decay. Beauty untested is fragile. Beauty that survives, struggle becomes eternal. If you asked me now what the Whitmore cabin really is, I would tell you this. It is proof that one person's devotion to craft can echo louder than generations of greed. It is a story carved into wood, written across stars, and told again every time a child picks up a chisel and believes they can make something worth keeping. I see it every day in Emma's, smile in Eleanor's, quiet pride in Jake's, relentless pursuit of justice. The story lives on, in their hands, their hearts, their work. And sometimes, when the moon rises and the lake stills, I look at the cabin's reflection in the water and think of all the people who will come after us. People who will never know the fear, the fights, the hearings. They will just know this place as something sacred that stood the test of both time and greed. That is the kind of immortality no amount of money can buy. So if you are listening to this and you have ever felt powerless against your HOA, your boss, your debt, your fear, remember this story. Remember Marcus Bennett and the cabin that refused to be stolen. You are not powerless. You are not alone. And no one, not a board, not a bully, not a signature, can take away what you build with purpose and patience. Because true ownership, as Whitmore taught me, is not written on paper. It is written among the stars. If this story opened your eyes, hit like, share it with someone fighting their own battle, and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary power. And remember, the next time someone tells you it is impossible, just smile and start carving.